These notes are all about death in terms of manner, mechanism, cause, and time. By the end of these notes, you will be able to explain the development of liver, rigor, and alga mortis following death, use evidence of these to estimate time of death, use evidence of stomach contents to estimate time of death, use insect evidence to estimate time of death, and explain how environmental factors can affect the estimated time of death. So when it comes to manner of death, the manner of death can be natural, accidental, suicide, homicide, or undetermined. So a lot of times on TV when you see them ask about the cause of death and the person answers that it's natural, what they're really talking about is the manner of death. It is sometimes difficult to determine the manner of death because sometimes the evidence is not readily apparent as to what the actual manner is. The most common manner of death is natural. A majority of people do die relating to illness or old age. On the other hand, we have cause and mechanism of death. The reason for the death is the cause of death. Meanwhile, the specific change in the body that brought about the cessation of life is the mechanism of death. So, for example, a gunshot wound might be the cause of death, but bleeding out is the mechanism of death, that the person lost so much blood due to the gunshot wound that they ended up dying, or that the gunshot wound severed their brainstem. So that is how they are different. So when it comes to estimating time of death, we have a few factors we can look at. The first of which is called liver mortis. This literally means the leadened color of death. So when red blood cells that you know are circling around your body right now break down, they turn a bluish purple color. In a non-death related way, this actually happens to you all the time. Anytime you have gotten a bruise, that bluish purple color of the bruise is actually because there are dead and dying red blood cells in that area. With decomposition, blood seeps down and settles in the lower parts of the body. So right now, your heart is pushing your blood all around your body. It's why bruises don't stay forever, because eventually all of those red blood cells get cleaned up and taken away. However, once you die, your heart is no longer pushing that blood all around your body, meaning it's going to start to settle in whatever areas gravity is going to make it settle in. The discoloration that accompanies this becomes permanent after 8 hours. So before the 8-hour mark, if a body is moved, the coloring is going to move with it. Meanwhile, after the 8-hour mark, even if you move the body, where the liver mortis color is going to remain in that location. And it's a great indication to us whether a body has been moved or not after death. Warmth does accelerate this process. The warmer an environment is, the quicker red blood cells break down and the quicker the blood is going to settle, meaning it's going to become permanent quicker. Similarly, the cooler it is, the slower this process will take. Our next way of estimating time of death is something called rigor mortis. This is the one students are most familiar with because you hear about it on TV shows. And it literally stands for the rigidity of death. At death, skeletal muscles cannot relax. Calcium, potassium, all of these other things are encouraging your brain's ability to tell your muscles to contract and relax, and your muscles' abilities to do those things. But without all of those things, your body eventually runs out of them, thus meaning that the muscles can no longer relax. So without oxygen, calcium accumulates in these muscles, which is what makes them stiff. This starts with the eyelids and jaw muscles and then moves upwards through the rest of the face, so getting your cheeks and stuff like that. Then it moves downward to the muscles of your chest, then out to your upper limbs, and then down to your abdomen, your tummy area. And then it's going to move into your lower limbs. This largely has to do with going through muscles based on their size, where our largest muscles, which are in our lower limbs, are the last to become stiff. After about 15 to 36 hours, the muscle fibers begin to dissolve, and then the softening begins in the same order. So people go into rigor mortis, but they also come back out of rigor mortis. It is not a state that they stay in permanently. As far as a chart for you of the timeline that you need to know, after death, the about 2 to 6 hour mark is when rigor is going to begin. This is when the body becomes stiff, and the stiffness moves down the body in the order we talked about before. Stiffness begins with the eyelids and jaw muscles after about 2 hours, and then the center of the body is going to begin to stiffen at that point. At about the 12-hour mark, rigor is going to be complete. The entire body is going to be in rigor mortis. At about the 15 to 36 hour mark is when we experience a slow loss of rigor, where it is going to go out in the same order that it went in, like we talked about before. Then from the 36 to 48 hour mark is when rigor totally disappears and muscles become relaxed. 36 is kind of the standard. However, there are many variables that may extend rigor beyond the normal 36 hours. So there are many factors that affect when rigor mortis sets in and how long it lasts. The three main factors that we're going to focus on are temperature, activity before death, and overall body weight. As far as temperature is concerned, cold temperature is going to inhibit rigor, meaning it is going to have a slower onset and slower progression. Meanwhile, warmer temperatures are going to accelerate rigor, so it is going to have a faster onset and a faster progression. This all has to do with how quickly the body is using up its oxygen and how quickly the calcium is getting stuck. As far as activity before death is concerned, aerobic exercise is going to accelerate rigor. That's because aerobic exercise often causes your muscles to become deplete of oxygen. Since the muscles are already deplete of oxygen, and additionally your body is at a higher temperature, it's going to cause rigor to happen faster. Meanwhile, if someone is asleep, it's going to be slower because when you're sleeping, your body actually becomes really well oxygenated because you're breathing without even thinking about it. So having all of that oxygen means that you are going to go into rigor slower. As far as body weight is concerned, this is the one that always gets students, so make sure to pay close attention. People who are obese or overweight tend to experience slower rigor, and this is because oxygen is actually stored inside fat. So people who are overweight or have more fat have more oxygen in their bodies for the body to use before it becomes depleted of oxygen. Meanwhile, people who are thinner have accelerated rigor because the body is going to lose oxygen a lot quicker. It's also going to lose, the body is going to heat faster as well. Which brings us to our third of the mortises to estimate time of death, rigor mortis, which means the chill of death. So in death, a body no longer generates warmth and is going to begin to cool down. In general, our bodies end up being at about 96.8 degrees. That's an average though. And most rooms you're in are between 68 and 70 degrees. So there's a lot of room for you to lose heat. So to find the standard temperature of a corpse, the thermometer is inserted into the liver. Keep in mind this individual is dead, so it does not hurt them. So the human body is typically at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. This is an average, and there are some people who run warmer versus cooler. So if possible, it is important to get an estimated temperature that the person normally would be from the family, just so it does not mess up your estimates. For example, my body temperature tends to actually be at about 96.8. I tend to be colder than average all the time. That would be information that my family would probably want to pass on in the event of my untimely death. So body heat is lost at a rate of about 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit for the first 12 hours, and then body heat is lost at a rate of 0.7 degrees Fahrenheit after that first 12 hours. It has to do with the closer you get to the temperature of your area, how you're going to lose heat is going to slow down over time. The maximum loss of 16.8 degrees can be lost during the first 12 hours. That's just what happens if you multiply 1.4 times 12. You can memorize this number or not. It does not really matter, but you do need to memorize the two previous numbers. So let's do some of those alka mortis calculations. So you're told a body is found with a temperature of 90.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and you are asked how long has it been dead. So you take the average human body temperature, 98.6 degrees, and you subtract the body temperature that they currently are, 90.7. And it's going to get that you have 7.9 degrees lost. Now we know that 7.9 is less than 16.8. This is why I personally memorized 16.8, but once again, up to you. So we know that it has been less than 12 hours. That is important for our calculations. So now you're going to take 7.9 and divide it by 1.4, and we know that it's been about 5.6 hours since death. Now typically, when giving an estimate, they are not going to give something as specific as that, and they're probably going to say that this person has been dead for 5 to 6 hours. Let's try another one. You're told a body is found with a temperature of 78.2 degrees Fahrenheit, and once again ask how long have they been dead. So we take our 98.6 and we subtract 78.2 to get 20.4 degrees lost. Now this time we find that 20.4 is greater than 16.8, so we know they've been dead for more than 12 hours. So we are going to take the 20.4 degrees lost, and we are then going to subtract the 16.8, because we know that's how much they lost during the first 12 hours. And we get 3.6 degrees lost after the first 12 hours. We are then going to take 3.6 and divide it by 0.7 to get 5.1 hours. But don't forget, we subtracted essentially 12 hours up here, so we need to add those 12 hours back down here, and we know that this person has been dead for about 17.1 hours. You are going to be expected to be able to do both of these type of problems, so if you have any questions, we'll be practicing them in class, and you're welcome to ask then. We can also estimate time of death using stomach and intestinal contents. So once you die, your body stops digesting food. However, we can tell how long it has been since your last meal based on your stomach contents. So if food is present in the stomach, death occurred between 0 and 2 hours after that person had their last meal. So we know that that person ate and was probably kind of okay leading up to their death. Meanwhile, if the stomach is empty of food, but food is found in the small intestine, death occurred approximately 4 to 6 hours after their last meal. Now this is a normal time that most people go in between eating, so this isn't necessarily particularly alarming, but does give us kind of a timeline of where to search depending on if we have a large amount of time to account for where they were missing or something. Now if you're wondering about, well, what about between 2 and 4 hours, that means that you'd probably still have some food in the stomach, but some food is moved on to the small intestine. Food does not just move all in one giant lump, it does slowly digest. If waste are only found in the large intestine, death occurred 12 plus hours after the last meal. Now this is a long time for someone to go without eating, so that does make us wonder if they were being held hostage or something of that nature. Now obviously there are people on diets, they don't eat for 12 or more hours, but that might be something their family could fill us in on. We can also estimate time of death using the potassium I levels. This one is really cool. So there is fluid within the eye that is called vitreous humor. And a sample should be taken from one of the eyes immediately. And a second sample should be taken from the other eye, whichever eye you did not take the original sample from, and this is done using a syringe, about an hour or two later. You do want to keep track of how long it was between samples. So after death, the cells in the eye release potassium into the eye fluid. Scientists can use the rate at which potassium is released to approximate a time of death. So normally there is not potassium in this fluid, So if you know that after an hour, the potassium increased from this number to that number, that tells you about how much potassium is being added every hour, and you can backtrack to say when would it have been 0 potassium, and it gives you another estimated time of death. This is dependent on ambient temperature, like we've talked about before. Warmer temperatures are going to speed this up. Slower temperatures are going to slow it down. We can also estimate if a body is really far gone. We can use the stages of decomp to get an estimated time of death. Now we aren't talking about hours like we have been up until now. We're going to start talking more about days. So within 2 days after death, the cell autolysis begins. This means the cells all start to rupture, auto meaning automatically, lysis meaning to burst, automatically bursting. Green purplish staining occurs from blood decomposition. And the skin is going to take on a marbled appearance where all of the kind of veins start to look very large and purpley, kind of like the gray swirls in a marble countertop. The face also becomes discolored. Since the face has the least amount of muscle or fat in it, it's going to be the first to show very significant signs of decomp. After 4 days, the skin is going to have blistered. The abdomen swells with gas as CO2 is released from the intestinal bacteria. Keep in mind, your intestines are home to a whole bunch of good bacteria. They help you live your healthiest, best life. They don't die just because you died, and since you're not eating, they start breaking down you. So they're still living their best life and producing carbon dioxide. Normally, when they produce carbon dioxide, you release it in one form or another. But when someone's dead, they have no way of releasing it anymore. Within 6 to 10 days, the corpse may burst from that buildup of gas in our previous step. Now, this is not like crazy explosion, blood and guts going everywhere. It's kind of like a balloon popping. Fluids begin to leak from any of the body openings. Eyeballs and other tissues liquefy. And the skin falls off. So you can see that decomposition is not a pretty thing to happen. Now, if you are curious, people who have died and who have been embalmed, which happens to most people when we have them for funerals, this does not happen to them because we have removed blood and other liquids. They do not decompose in this manner. This is people who have died and have not had anything done to them, either because they have been hidden somewhere or because that is how they chose to be buried. Now, when it comes to the stages of decomposition, we divide it into essentially 5 stages. The first is initial decay. This is where your outside appearance still appears normal, but decomposition is starting. Essentially, bodies do start to decompose at the minute of death. There's just not any obvious signs. Most people get discovered during this stage, and that is when their family begins planning funeral proceedings for them. The next stage is putrefaction, and this is the odor of decaying flesh is present, and the corpse appears swollen. Next, we move to black putrefaction, and this is where there is a very strong odor, and parts of the flesh appear black, gases escape, and the corpse collapses. So these are the stages we talked about on our previous slides. But technically, decay goes past this. Then we have butyric fermentation, which is when the corpse begins to dry out, and the flesh is actually mainly gone at this point. And then in our last stage is actually dry decay, where the corpse is almost dry and decay slows significantly at this point because this person is basically beef jerky, textured muscle, and bone. They've essentially reached a mummification sort of state. We can also estimate a time of death with insects. So besides recording data about the environment at a crime scene, for all the reasons we've talked about before, because the temperature does influence a lot of our estimates, a forensic entomologist collects insect evidence. So within minutes of death, certain insects arrive to lay their eggs on the warm body. Blowflies are a common example. We are going to be focusing on the blowfly life cycle. However, forensic entomologists study hundreds of thousands of different types of insects in relation to how they can affect or give us an estimated time of death. As a corpse progresses through the stages of decomposition, other kinds of insects arrive. Once again, we are not going to be getting into them just because you could do a whole course on this. We're going to focus on the blowfly. So let's talk about the blowfly. The blowfly eggs can be found in the moist, warm areas of the corpse within 8 hours after death. So think ears, mouth, all of your places that get sweaty when you exercise. That's where the blowflies are going to lay their eggs because that's going to be the warmest, safest places. They will have progressed to the first of their 3 larval stages, and that's what it looks like right up here, within about 20 hours. Around 2.5 days, they will be in their second larval stage, and by the 4th or 5th day, they will have progressed to the third of 3 larval stages. So it takes us 4 or 5 days to end up with stage 3 larva after someone has died. By the 8th or 12th day, the larva will migrate away from the corpse to a dry place. So by this time, the body is pretty gross, and our insects want to move away from there for their next stage, because in their next stage, they become a pupa and immobile. And within 18 to 24 days, they will change from white to dark. Their pupa does need to be dry, and that's why they have to move away from the body. Then by the 21st to 24th day, the pupa cases will split open and the adult blowflies here will emerge. At this point, our body has basically a gross puddle around it and bones and not much else. So often these blowflies are then going to leave the area and go somewhere else. However, if it is a sealed environment or they still feel based on the temperature and area of the environment, they may still stick around, and this can be confusing because you then have different stages of blowfly all happening at the same time, and we'll experience that in our lab. Because scientists know how long it takes for the various stages of development at given temperatures, forensic entomologists can determine when the insects must have arrived, as we discussed on our previous slides. Because life cycles are affected by fluctuations in daily environmental conditions, insect evidence cannot provide an exact time of death. It's going to give a day range, not an hour range. Insect evidence, nonetheless, can yield a close estimate. So those are all the things that happens to the body after death and how we can estimate a time of death once someone dies. Make sure you know all of these numbers. They take a while to learn, and you don't want to be trying to learn them all the night before.